Why standest thou afar off, O Lord? Why hidest thou thyself in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride doth persecute the poor. Let them be taken in the devices that they have imagined. For the wicked boasteth of his heart's desire, and blesseth the covetous, whom the Lord abhorreth. The wicked through of his countenance will not seek after God. God is not in all his thoughts. His ways are always grievous. Thy judgments are far above out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he puffeth at them. He hath said in his heart, I shall not be moved, for I shall never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and fraud. Under his tongue is mischief and vanity. He sitteth in the lurking places of the villages. In the secret places doth he murder the innocent. His eyes are privily set against the poor. He lieth in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lieth in wait to catch the poor. He doth catch the poor when he draweth him into his net. He croucheth and humbleth himself, that the poor may fall by his strong ones. He hath said in his heart, God hath forgotten. He hideth his face. He will never see it. Arise, O Lord. O God, lift up thine hand. Forget not the humble. Wherefore doth the wicked contemn God? He hath said in his heart, Thou wilt not require it. Thou hast seen it, for thou beholdest mischief and spite, to requite it with thy hand. The poor committeth himself unto thee. Thou art the helper of the fatherless. Break thou the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness till thou find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The heathen are perished out of his land. Lord, thou hast heard the desire of the humble. Thou wilt prepare their heart. Thou wilt cause thine ear to hear, to judge the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. All right, so here we have Psalm 10. And as you look at these Psalms, one of the first things we want to draw our attention to or make a decision about is what category does this Psalm belong to? I reduced the categories of the Psalms down to 4, so it's easy to remember. This is an extreme simplification, but you have praise Psalms, you have prayer Psalms, you have pilgrim Psalms, you have program Psalms. And so the praise, celebrating what God can do, prayer, asking God to do something specific. Pilgrim Psalms are focused on God doing a work that is drawing toward the conclusion of the restoration, redemption, and reign of God upon this earth. And then that's pilgrim, and then program is the messianic Psalms, those that are focused on what Christ is accomplishing. So, Psalm 10, what category? Prayer. Okay, that's what I heard, prayer. That's what I put down too. I put down prayer because that seemed to make sense. It starts off with a prayer, and it's focused on God remedying the injustice all around. And so this is one that stands out in my mind as an example of prayer. All right, so when you look at these Psalms, we are in the first book of the book of Psalms. I made mention of that just recently, and just want to make sure that we understand that the Psalms has been edited into a compilation that has 5 book structures. And the Jewish approach to studying this would be that each of the books would align or parallel with one of the books of the Pentateuch, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And so the first book of Psalms would be read in parallel or read with the same appreciation of what the book of Genesis would be teaching. The book of Genesis is a foundational book. It talks about the amazing and abounding grace of God. It emphasizes the sovereignty of God, how he is in control of all his creation, and he can mastermind the affairs and events of man. And so that's the filter through which we are reading this psalm. What stands out to you in this psalm? What are the things that you recognize immediately as substantial to the study of Psalm 10? Okay, so a list of you see a lot of the physical makeup, if you will, but maybe even immaterial makeup of the wicked. You see that the wicked, there's a lot that emphasizes his pride, his eyes, his a lot of things, his den, all these different things that emphasize the caricature of the wicked. The wicked is described in tremendous detail in this psalm. And I think that that's got to stand out in our mind as an important observation. So good observation there. Yep. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of secrecy. There's a lot of hiding. There's a lot of subterfuge. There's a lot of conspiracy. You're looking at this psalm, and there are things that are going on beneath the surface. It's a deep state kind of thing that's going on in Psalm 10. The wicked are definitely pulling strings behind the scenes, and that's what the psalm portrays. Good. Yep. Yes, yes. The wicked is delusional in his practice, and I worked through that. There's actually a third heart statement. I entitled this, instead of conversation hearts around Valentine's, these are contemptuous hearts. Okay, so there's 3 heart statements in this psalm. Michael got 2 of them. The third is in verse 13. He hath said in his heart, "Thou wilt not require it." And all 3 of those are delusional. And the only grounds for them to be able to believe that is that they, in Psalm 9, we saw, forgot God. God will turn those into hell who have forgotten him. The heathen have forgotten him. Psalm 9 and 10 form a pair of psalms that fit nicely together. And Psalm 9 emphasizes what the forgetting of God is all about. And Psalm 10 illustrates what's the result of forgetting God. It's not a pretty picture whatsoever. Those that forget God, in other words, intentionally suppress the presence, the awareness of God, Psalm 10 tells you exactly how they'll behave. Good. What else? What's that? Mm. Yeah, yeah. The poor in Psalm 10 are the doormat of the wicked. And they're mentioned multiple times. You'll see that in verse 2, verse 9 twice, verse 12, and then even the word humble in verse 17 has the same root as the word poor throughout the psalm. And we'll cover that in a little bit more detail. What's the deal with the poor versus the rich? I'll cover that when we get into some reflection on the psalm in a bit. Good. That's a great observation. Yep. He's a what? Oh, yep. Yeah, he's a judge and he's a helper of the poor, of the humble, of the needy. God is quick to answer to the cry of those in need. Good. Anyone else tonight? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I put down that in verse 6, it's the wicked feel invincible. I'm not going to be moved. I'm not going to slip. My foot's not going to be slipping away. In verse 11, the wicked are invisible. They think that God can't see them, that what they do is imperceptible. And then in verse 13, they're inviolable, which means that they are untouchable, basically. I'm not going to be held accountable for any of this. And so that's the way I outlined it. But yeah, the wicked there, just the description of their character. You cannot arrive at that conclusion unless you just whisk away the idea or concept of God. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, verse 4 would be one of those key texts for atheism. It's actually, I've seen it cross-referenced to Psalm 14:1 and others like that. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. And so you're seeing the reign of fools in Psalm 10. And verse 4 is really the pride of their countenance. They will not seek after God. God is not in all his thoughts. In other words, he is not thinking about God whatsoever. He does not think about anything that has to do with God. He ignores that completely. Good. Good observation so far. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so you have that picture picked up later on in the psalm when it talks about the lion that's lurking in his den, ready to pounce upon those who are the most vulnerable. And so the arrogance of the wicked playing out as a predatory animal. And that's definitely grabbing at the most vulnerable. Case in point, just how the vulnerable are so taken advantage of. There's a lot of buzz about a specific advertisement for a fashion group that incorporated children holding teddy bears that had equipment that's very sadistic in a form of intimacy that's just totally wrong and ungodly. And strewn around the whole scene of the advertisement were leaflets about pedophilia, as if that it was praising or it was trying to elevate pedophilia. And you're looking at all this and you have to recognize, what in the world? Why in the world would a fashion group, fashion magazine, or fashion company want to target children like that? Well, Psalm 10 illustrates it, or I think teaches on it pretty clearly. Teaches on it about the vulnerable are the ones that are going to be shredded into pieces. And those children are the vulnerable, and they're the target. They're the target. Anyone else? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Great companion to that. And God eventually did avenge those who were attacked by the Amalekites. And but He does that with a space of mercy. I've taught that mercy is the space God allots for you to respond to the message He is giving you. And that merciful time is what God gives. And so we often expect God, why, like the psalm begins, why are you not acting, God? Look at all that's going on around us. And there's plenty in our society today that we could really kind of pull on the tug on the curtains of heaven and say, come on now, why aren't you getting into this? There's a lot that needs to be done. But God has His timetable, and His timing is always perfect. His timing is always right. And sometimes it's hard for us to process that. Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah. Where we were, and then even where we would have been if it weren't for grace. And so when you start to compare all of that, you realize I'm thankful that God is merciful, thankful that God is gracious. It does not make it any easier to consider the evil that does occur in this world. The evil that does occur is horrific, and it's tragic. We as salt and light, though, need to have the conserving force in this world to try to restrain the work of darkness and to be the ones that shine as lights in this crooked and perverse world. Yep. Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, I actually had it in my notes as PFFFT. Pfft. That's how the wicked look at the weak. Yeah, they're nothing to them. They're nothing. And so it's kind of the inverse of what you see in Psalm 1, that the ungodly are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. In God's eyes, he looks down and laughs at what the world is attempting, what the ungodly's agenda is all about. From God's perspective, that's, like, what's that all about? But the wicked look at the poor, and that's how they respond. Good. Good. Anyone else tonight? No one's mentioned the names of God, which actually this psalm has an array of them, and usually someone jumps on that, so I'm going to take it. The capital Lord is used 5 times in this psalm. You'll see that in 1, 3, 12, 16, and 17. And then you have God as Elohim, which is the Genesis account introduction of Elohim, God. That's in 4 and 13. But then you have also El in verses 11 and 12. And that's just more of a generic identity or name for God. But that's how the fool is going to respond to him. The fool, if you saw back at verse number 6, he doesn't have any reference to God. But in verse 11, he's going to have a reference to God here. He has said in his heart, God hath forgotten. He basically denigrates God as a pagan deity, as like all these other gods that you can manipulate and you can worship and dupe into pleasing your or working with your agenda. That's how he views God. In verse 12, the psalmist cries out, "O Lord, O God, lift up thine hand, forget not the humble." And he kind of elevates God in that respect. You see that king is also used in verse 16. The Lord is king forever and ever. The heathen are perished out of his land. And so that identity of the king is going to automatically associate us back to Psalm 2, because that's where it was introduced, that whole concept of the king. And so Psalm 10 really kind of interweaves Psalm 1 and 2, as those are the themes. Psalm 1 and 2 present the themes and the direction of the book of Psalms. Psalm 10 interweaves all of those. Great. These are great observations. Let's jump in and make some, let's just kind of reflect and marinate in this and enjoy this as reflective literature. I mentioned last week and this week as well that Psalm 9 and 10 serve as a pair, and they're closely related in their focus. Psalm 9 is going to automatically celebrate that God is going to avenge. And if you remember, we tapped into the specific phrase in verse 12, when he maketh inquisition for blood. In other words, he is that avenger that's going to be the Goel, the redeemer of those who are oppressed. He's going to fight for those who have been wronged. God doesn't stand for social injustice, at least the way the Bible defines it. That word is used in so many, stretched beyond its usefulness in our society and culture today. But you see that Psalm 9 is going to praise God for that. But then Psalm 10 presents a different aspect of it, where it's a prayer, as in, okay, Lord, so we celebrated this is what you do. This is how you operate now. When is that going to happen? When does that kick in? We'd really like to see that happen. And so Psalm 9 and 10 give us both dynamics when it comes to how God works in our human history. We are thankful that God will make all things that are wrong right. He will set the record straight. But we're also in the tension of wondering, well, so when will that be? I really would like to see that take place. And so those two Psalms work together well. What Psalm 10 kind of helps us put into categories in our mind is that when there's this perceived delay of God working, there's the concern of the righteous, as in, God, are you going to actually do what you said you would do? But then there's the complacency of the wicked, who feel like, well, I didn't get struck with lightning, so I must be doing okay. There's no one up there that's going to get in my way or going to stop me, so I'm just going to keep on doing what I am doing. And the psalmist is going to describe the activity of the wicked pretty intensely in verses 2 through 7. I think that Martin Luther made a comment on this psalm. He said, "There is not, in my judgment, a psalm which describes the mind, the manners, the works, the words, the feelings, and the fate of the ungodly with so much propriety, fullness, and light, as this psalm does. In other words, he felt like with all the study he had invested in Scripture, this psalm gave us the most high-definition detail as to the way the wicked operate, their caricature, how they manifest themselves. And so this is one of those psalms that's going to be one that is important for us to understand as we align the newspaper of our culture alongside it, and we are able to recognize, oh, those are the ungodly, those are the wicked. And we can see it play out because Psalm 10, 2 through 7 is going to describe their activity in no uncertain terms. And so let's just kind of look at what this description is all about. Verse 2, he says, the wicked in his pride doth persecute the poor. I mentioned that we want to look at what's the deal with rich versus poor. Is the Bible hating on rich people? When you read through several passages, you might think so. The book of James is really hard on the rich versus the poor. And what's this all about? Well, get into the cultural mindset. In the cultural mindset, the Jewish people looked at riches as an extraordinary blessing of God. But to what purpose were those blessings given? In the way that their economy was established by God, the rich were supposed to be collaborators with God who worked in tandem with God. God has given them blessings so that they could now dispense blessings. God is a dispenser of blessing so that we can turn and be a dispenser of blessing as well. But when the rich does not see the blessings as an opportunity to dispense blessings, but instead treat it as something that they retain as in some reservoir. These are my blessings, and I'm going to hold on to them. They're living in a scarcity mindset. And the scarcity mindset is something that is plaguing a lot of our culture today, where we want to grasp and grab at everything to say, mine. You know, that whole nursery mentality is still alive and well in our culture today. And so the scarcity mindset brings them to a point where they're now not seeing riches as an opportunity to work alongside of God. Riches now become an opposition to God's work. Their resistance to dispense of blessing, to share that blessing, to be godlike in the way that they're able to be conduits of that blessing, they are now in opposition to God. And so what's the hating on the rich all about? The hating on the rich is that they have become these reservoirs that have held on to the riches. I think this is really clearly demonstrated in Jesus' parable in Luke 12, where the rich farmer, the wealthy farmer, has a great harvest, and he looks around at his harvest and he says, man, I don't have enough barns to contain all that I have gotten this year. What am I to do? The moment he asks that question is a Psalm 10 situation. He should not have even asked the question, what shall I do? The fact he asked the question shows he has ignored the counsel of God. He has no desire to honor what God's design and desire is with the riches he has been given. He is doing a verse 4, no thoughts of God in his mind. Because if he was a student of the law, he would never have asked that question. He would have known exactly what to do with the riches that God has given him. He would have realized that as I've received these blessings from God, the great and rich one of heaven, now I am to be a dispenser of those things and responsibly be a blessing to others as well. But the fact he asks that question shows that he is in opposition to God's ideal, and so he is going to hold on to all those riches for himself, and he says, I've got it. I'm going to tear down my barns and build greater barns. And what's the word from heaven? The Lord said, you fool. Don't you realize that today your life will be required of you, and to whom will those riches then be? And the fact is that in that parable, he calls him a fool. And what's that bringing us all the way back to? This very principle here. This very principle of the rich versus poor. So is God hating on the rich, and is he inexplicably favorable to the poor? There are a lot of bad poor people out there. right? So it's not just because, well, if I'm poor, God overlooks a lot of things. No, there's a lot of people that are poor that are not right with God, and there are a lot of poor people who will spend eternity in the lake of fire because of their refusal to accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. So what's the deal, though? The deal in this is that God is going to focus on the fact that the rich have absconded with the blessings that God has given and taken them for themselves. They've pilfered the treasuries of heaven, the storehouses of God, for their own gain and have refused to work in tandem or collaboration with God. This is, I believe, you're seeing with the rich and poor play out. You're seeing the same philosophy of what God established at creation. He created man, placed him in the garden to be a collaborator with God, have dominion upon the creation or over the creation. He wanted man to be have co-regency with him, to enjoy the world that he had created and to really bring about the best it could possibly produce. But man decided, no, I'm going to do this my own way, and the rebellion was shaking the fist of man at the face of God. And so that's what the rich are doing. So that's what the deal is. So when God is going to talk about the rich versus the poor, that's the paradigm that you are seeing play out in this. The wicked is going to boast and bless. That's in verse number 3. For the wicked boasteth of his heart's desire, and blesseth the covetous, whom the Lord abhorreth. So you have here that the wicked are going to be in absolute opposition to God. They're going to boast about what their heart's desire is and not God's heart's desire. They're not living a Psalm 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart kind of lifestyle. They're going to boast in what they want to do, his heart's desire, and they're going to bless those who are covetous, those who are like them. Birds of a feather flock together, and that's what we are seeing play out with this wicked pattern in verse number 3. And so then verse 4 is going to emphasize some other phrases that will come up throughout the rest of the psalm. The wicked, through the pride of his countenance, will not seek after God. Now that word seek will appear 2 other times in this psalm, and eventually you'll see at the end that the Lord will seek out the wicked until they find none. And so the wicked are going to seek, not going to seek after God. They're going to pretend like God doesn't exist, but don't you worry, God will find the wicked and he will take care of them. God is not in all his thoughts. We already covered that in detail as a cross-reference to Psalm 14:1. In verse number 5, his ways are always grievous. What this is really pointing out is that the wicked, the way they have chosen, is always going to be laborious. It's always toilsome. It's always wearing them out. Why? Well, because if you work against God, you're working against the grain. When you're working against God, you are taking the difficult path. The way of the transgressor is hard. That's what the Word of God says, and that's exactly what this is describing here. Thy judgments are far above out of his sight. In other words, the ways of God are just way beyond him. He's not even looking in that direction. As for all his enemies, he puffeth at them. He thinks they're nothing but chaff. Verse 6, he hath said in his heart, this is the first contemptuous heart statement, I shall not be moved, for I shall never be in adversity. And so here you have him boasting in his arrogance. I would say Martin Luther went on to talk about in this psalm that it's fitting to look at the psalm with its description of the ungodly, the lawless one, as a description of the Antichrist. Now, there's not any Antichrist-specific terminology in this psalm, but anything that you imagine about the Antichrist will be consistent with what Psalm 10 tells us. He will be full of pride. And there are some phrases that come up in this psalm that make me kind of speculate about the prophetic layering of this psalm, especially the last verse of the psalm, to judge the fatherless and oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. Well, the man of the earth is one of those phrases that's very close to ways that the Antichrist is described in other parts, and then the arrogance is just all over the psalm. And so I believe that you are potentially looking at a description that would fit the ungodliest of the ungodly, the Antichrist. In verse number 6, he is thinking he's invincible. I shall not be moved, which means I won't be tottering, or I won't have my feet slip out from under me, for I shall never be in adversity, or he'll never see hard times. He'll never see hard times. And so when you look at that philosophy, it explains a whole lot. In verse 7, his mouth is full of, and when I looked at this list, man, what a list is this? Sometimes we read through these lists and we don't really dwell on them. But read through them, and if you don't know exactly what that word is trying to communicate, get a Bible tool that will help you know exactly what that term is trying to communicate. There are a lot of online ones where you can just basically click and hold on a word, and it'll tell you what that word specifically, the nuance of it, is trying to communicate. So you have the list here of 5 things. You have cursing, deceit, fraud, mischief, vanity. Cursing, deceit, fraud, mischief, and vanity. And so cursing is emphasizing that he makes oaths or promises that certain things will be the way that he says they will be, but that's followed right away with deceit and fraud. Deceit is that treachery, and fraud comes from the root meaning to sever, divide something. It'd be like if I had a candy bar and I said, would you like this candy bar? And you said, yeah, I really would like this candy bar. And I said, great. I just tore off half of it and gave it to you. Now, in that situation, you didn't deserve the candy bar, so you got half a candy bar. Okay, whatever, no biggie. I can take that. But if I promised you that this would be done and I only give you half, that's a problem. I've dealt with those kinds of situations in business before, and we don't like that. We don't like to deal with those situations where things are going on and you say this is what you expect and the bid is this, and then you come back and the job's not done. You know, that's not a good thing. That's the fraud here. And so the reason why the oath cursing is translated or encapsulated this way is because it's followed with deceit and fraud. This is the way the wicked operate. Oh, yes, that's what I'll do. I know the whole time I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to work this away, and I'm going to have all the loopholes that'll work out for my benefit, and you end up with half or less than what you were promised. That's the way the wicked operate. It says under their tongue is mischief and vanity. The mischief is that they're scheming with this toil of just creating and crafting the most wicked things they could possibly craft. You know, when you lay in bed at night and sometimes your mind wanders and good ideas come to your mind. I mean, have you ever gone to bed with a problem that you're trying to solve? I've had Bible study passages where I'm trying to figure out, like, how am I going to explain this? How am I going to explain this? And I've had mornings where I wake up and I'm like, I got it. I tell Christina, I got the way I'm going to explain this thing, and I go and I write it down. And you can go to bed and solve problems that way, and those are good things to do. But these guys, they go to bed with, how can I get at that guy? How can I really make this one work to my advantage? That's what the mischief is all about. And vanity. Vanity is often a word for emptiness. This is a specific term that just talks about they're almost vacuous. They're so open to anything that they automatically gravitated to or absorb treachery. They absorb wickedness. That's the idea here. A vacuum desires to be filled. Scientifically, that's what we are taught. And so them being a vacuum, they desire to be filled. And what's the most at-hand commodity around them? Not righteousness, but wickedness. And since they are so full of that vanity, they're so vacuous, they are drawing in with all their might that wickedness and idolatry. Well, that lengthy list is really illustrated in verses 8 through 10. So you have the description in verse 7 and then the illustration of it in verses 8 through 10. You see, I like Philip's outline of this. He says in verse 8, you see his cruelty. He sitteth in lurking places of the villages, in the secret places doth he murder the innocent. His eyes are privily set against the poor. It's just so sinister a picture. I get the idea of him. He's back in some alleyway and just a simpleton walks by, not expecting anything, nothing adverse, nothing wrong, and just with barely a whimper, that simpleton is dispatched, is taken out, and taken advantage of. And all of that takes place is just so cruel. It really is cruel. But then in verse number 9, you see his confidence. He lieth in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lieth in wait to catch the poor. He doth catch the poor when he draweth them into his net. You see just the whole imagery here of this confidence. The lion is often one of those animals that we look at with just so much, I guess, appreciation. They're just so majestic. It's a majestic animal. So let's reduce it down to a cat. When you look at a cat operating as a cat does, I was reading an article that talked about the damage that cats do in your neighborhood. The amount of carnage that cats leave behind is astounding. What they have estimated is that if just your normal neighborhood cats that are roaming around, if you took the number of critters, fowl and rodents that they killed in a year, cats will have killed the human population. If you made all those a human population number, they would have killed the human population over 2 times in a year. That's how much carnage cats have, okay? And so when you're looking at a cat, you think, oh, how cute, how cuddly, how fuzzy, but that thing is a dastardly animal, okay? It is a vicious beast. And that cat looks so calm and collected. I mean, it is so smooth. It sits there like it's got not a care in this world. It's ambivalent of you, doesn't care what you think about it too much. And as it's operating that way, it's setting the stage for, I'm not really interested, but I really am, and I'm going to get what I want. That's really the image here of the confidence of these wicked. They look like, I'm not really interested in that, but all the while, they are plotting and planning and scheming how they're going to do that. And then Philip says, you can see their cunning. He croucheth and humbleth himself, that the poor may fall by his strong ones. The wicked, he feigns this idea of, I'm just so, I'm a people person. I'm one of you. I'm not the sophisticated, high class kind of person. I'm just like you. But he does that to ensnare them in the nets that he has laid for them. What you see now in verse 12, I'm sorry, I missed verse 11. He has said in his heart, God hath forgotten, he hideth his face, he will never see it. I talked about that. This is emphasizing his invisibility. He believes that God is stupid and can be duped, and so he has no fear of God. Verses 12 through 18 round out the rest of the psalm. The psalmist now calls upon the Lord to act. Arise, O Lord, O God, lift up thine hand, forget not the humble. So you have here some of those anthropomorphisms where God's hand is active in all that's going on. And you're going to see some more of that going on in the following verses. The psalmist wants God to answer on 2 motivations. The first motivation you see in verse 12, don't forget the humble. In other words, God, remember the ones that have been oppressed. You bless the rich so that they could be a blessing, and they've not done that. They've oppressed the humble and the poor. And so God, don't forget them. But the second motivation is that God would answer the challenge of the wicked. Answer the challenge of the wicked. He's not going to see. He's not going to judge. God can't do anything about this. God's impotent. He can't do anything to me. No, God, you arise and you take care of these wicked people. Verse 13. Wherefore doth the wicked contemn God? He hath said in his heart, thou wilt not require it. The word contemn is the same word that's used in verse 3 for abhor. The Lord abhors the covetous. But the wicked who blesses the covetous inversely contemns or abhors God. You see both ends of the spectrum playing out in this balance. And so if you want to be one that's going to, as 1 Samuel 2:30 tells us, if you're going to dishonor God, God will dishonor you. You'll be lightly esteemed, as what it says in 1 Samuel 2:30. But those who honor God, God wants to honor those. And so you see this balance of justice that God has in how he operates. In verse number Wherefore doth the wicked contemn God? He has said in his heart that will not require it. He just feels like he's untouchable. Verses 14 through 18 are going to answer the challenges that the wicked have given. And so let's just peel through these. Thou hast seen it. What did the wicked say earlier? You remember what the wicked said in verse number 11? He will never see it. Oh no, he has seen it. Verse 14 confirms that. For thou beholdest mischief and spite to requite it with thy hand. Go to the last line of verse 15. Seek out his wickedness till thou find none. I look at verses 14 and 15 as being parallels that are inverted. And so verse 14 talks about he does see it, and he's going to continue to see it until there's nothing left. And then verse 14 ends with the same kind of thought that verse 15 begins with. You look at it there. The poor committeth himself unto thee. Thou art the helper of the fatherless. Break thou the arm of the wicked and the evil man. And so I see that that's purely an answer to verse number 13. Thou will not require it. Oh, he will. He's a helper to the fatherless, and he's going to break your arm. He's going to take care of the strength of your activity. Verse 16, the Lord is king forever. Oh, the wicked say, God is not at all in his thoughts. And in verse 6, I shall never be in adversity. I shall not be moved. There's nothing that's going to resist me. But the Lord is king, and he's going to be their great resistor. He's going to stand in their way. He's king forever and ever. The heathen are perished out of his hand. Lord, thou hast heard the desire of the humble. Thou wilt prepare their heart. That is, that he will establish or ground them so that they will not be moved. That's the counter in verse number 17 to what the wicked said in verse number 6. The wicked said, I won't be moved. I won't face hard times. God says, no, you're about to be shredded. But I'm going to take care of the humble. Their heart will be prepared. That will cause thine ear to hear, to judge the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. And so you have the conclusion of this definitive statement. God will judge. Here you have in Psalm 9 and 10, 8 times that this lawlessness is addressed. 8 times. Let's just read through those as a recap. In Psalm 9, verse 5, thou hast rebuked the heathen, thou hast destroyed the wicked, thou hast put out their name forever and ever. What we're seeing is when the word wicked is used, it's tying right in with Psalm 1, the ungodly. Psalm 2, the ungodly. It's picking lawless theme. Verse number 16 and 17. The Lord is known by the judgment which he executeth. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. And then chapter 10, we've already looked at these, but verses 2, 3, and 4, you'll see the wicked all over those verses, and that's that lawlessness that you could very likely associate with the Antichrist. Verse 13, you see, wherefore doth the wicked contemn God? And then verse 15, that he will seek out wickedness till thou find none. One person in Charles Spurgeon's Treasuries is quoted as recognizing that Satan has 3 titles given in Scripture. I thought this was interesting. Setting forth his malignity against the church of God. His 3 titles: a dragon, to note his malice; a serpent, to note his subtlety; and a lion, to note his strength. None of all these can stand before prayer. The greatest malice of Haman sinks under the prayer of Esther. The deepest policy and subtlety of the counsel of Ahithophel withers before the prayer of David. The largest army, a host of 1,000 Ethiopians, run away like cowards before the prayer of King Asa. You see it play out over and over through Scripture, that this signature of the wicked feels that he can lift himself up with pride, as if I'm the one that's going to be calling the shots. There's no God that's going to stand in my way. And yet, every single time, man has vaunted himself to such a height in exaltation. God comes down and crashes him down to the earth. And so God will make all things right. God will make all things right. And we rejoice in the truth, the promise that God will. In the meantime, what does that mean for us? In the meantime, what it means for us is we need to do the most good we can. We need to be doing the most good we can. I point out the difference between the rich and the poor intentionally, because if we have been given so many blessings, what does that mean? We ought to be responsible with those blessings. We ought to seek out the ways that we can be a blessing. And to do that is going to be, I think, a lot more creative than we initially think of it to be. I think God would probably lead us in a whole lot of new direction if we would say, Lord, okay, I don't want to be like the rich that oppose you. I want to be like the rich that take the opportunity to extend those blessings to others. What does that look like? Oh, there's some really amazing stories as to how God used people who took the blessings that they were given to further the work of God as he directed them. What will you do? How will you serve in that way? We have enough time for some prayer, so divide in groups and pray over the requests that have been given to this evening. And then as you finish praying, if you don't mind, just exiting the sanctuary while others are finishing to their time of prayer. And you can fellowship out in the hallway and all that. Around 10 after, that's when Kids Club officially is wrapped up. And you can get your kids, be mindful of that so that you can relieve the workers quickly. They've had your kids for over an hour. I'm sure they wouldn't mind you coming and taking them right away. All right? And so pray for about 10 minutes and then off you go. Thank you for being here tonight. God bless you, and we look forward to seeing you.